Kafka Hibino is an ugly, pathetic loser who has no real ambitions and failed promises. Little does he know his life is about to take a huge turn for the worst. The story starts with the boring-looking city being under surveillance and is reported to have nothing unusual happening. Suddenly, a monster called Kaiju swims through the water, starts to attack the city. It sounds off the Kaiju emergency alarms. Citizens immediately start to seek shelter, and others even taking guesses as to which division is going to save the day. Turns out it is the 3rd Division to come to their rescue. As the Kaiju starts going on a Godzilla rampage, destroying everything in its path, the generic version of the Power Rangers from the 3rd Division shows up with a mysterious baddie gracefully jumping out of the aircraft. The rest of her groupies then start to move in. They get into formation and start uselessly shooting the monster. The helicopter then decides to shoot missiles at the Kaiju, which ends up just scratching its back. As the defense force start to close in, they subdue the Kaiju, and our mysterious hottie has had enough of her team's failure and blasts the Kaiju with a bazooka, obliterating it to pieces. It then starts pouring red rain. It then shows our main character, Kafka Hibino, an old, pathetic, ugly loser who has never achieved anything in his life. Stuck as a garbage man, his only job is to dispose and clean up dead Kaiju. Little does he know, his life is about to take a huge turn. Kafka and his co-workers spy from a distance, just like I did after my ex dumped me, and state that it's going to be a long day trying to dispose of the remains and clean up the city. After the Kaiju massacre is complete, the city celebrates the 3rd Division, while our worthless Kafka pathetically stands behind everyone while he waits to clean the aftermath. Finally, Kafka and the rest of the workers come in and clean up the site. As they start to cut down the Kaiju piece by piece, they send samples off to the defense force for testing. As they are slicing the bacon pieces down, Kafka yells at some good-for-nothing co-worker, who decides to move Kaiju bubble guts, causing it to explode and severely burn the worker's leg. Familiar with this, Kafka tells this man to apply for workers' comp, and so for his reward, Kafka gets reassigned poop duty, dreading the stench of nasty intestines. He gets through it, and he ends his day in his lonely, fancy apartment to watch his childhood friend Mina on TV, who is our mysterious baddie, get all the fame and glory as a young captain of the defense force. He then has a flashback of the childhood promise he made of killing all the Kaiju by joining the defense force. He then starts to pity himself, thinking about how he ended up in a situation, but tries to convince himself otherwise, saying his job is important. The next day, a young, plain, ugly-looking kid named Rino Ichikawa joins the disposal team and is introduced to Kafka. His boss tells Ichikawa that Kafka was a loser defense force dropout, which spikes Ichikawa's interest. Ichikawa then tells everyone he is not a quitter like Kafka is, even though he himself hasn't achieved anything unlike the future characters in this story. He is determined to be a part of the defense force. Little does he know he's about to be assigned poop duty alongside Kafka. As the day goes on, Kafka tries to help Ichikawa get through the day by giving him something he could stomach, since he needs the nutrients to help him work, and offers him some plugs for his nose to help with the stench. Ichikawa refuses it, so Kafka tries to wrestle him down for it. As they call it a day, Ichikawa thanks Kafka for helping him get through his first workday. He decides to tell Kafka that the defense force raised the age limit, giving our old geezer another chance to break his back to join the defense force. Kafka admits to Ichikawa he isn't a bad kid, and thanks him, when suddenly, a wild Yoju Diglett appears out of nowhere, ready to eat Ichikawa. Kafka jumps in to save him and tells Ichikawa to save himself, and to call in help while Kafka runs off, luring the Yoju away. It then goes into another flashback, showing their childhood city destroyed by a Kaiju, with Mina devoted about her destroyed home and the death of her cat. Does anyone ever wonder what happened to their parents? Anyways, the two youngins make a pact to make it into the defense force together. Now, back in the real world, thinking it's his time to shine, Kafka is determined to prove himself worthy of the Power Rangers, the defense force, and tries to fight off the Yoju. Since he is so weak, Kafka ends up folded like a lawn chair. Kafka is about to be devoured, and Ichikawa appears in time to slap sense into the Yoju. Kafka pities himself as usual by thinking nothing has changed and that he will never be able to protect anyone he cares about. The two face the Yoju. Kafka decides to have a yelling match with the monster, which is useless, like himself. Suddenly, the Kaiju is made into shreds by Mina and her giant white tiger. Points for whoever knows the tiger's name. Comment below. After, Kafka and Ichikawa are taken to the hospital due to their injuries. Kafka starts to loathe himself once again, saying Mina has left him in the dust. Ichikawa starts to simp and says that if it wasn't for Kafka, he would have died that day, and encourages Kafka to join the defense force because of how good-hearted Kafka is. While they're talking, a giant, disgusting mosquito-looking Kaiju confronts Kafka and says he's found him. Before Kafka can call for help, it flies into Kafka's mouth, disgustingly violating him, while Ichikawa is wondering what the heck the commotion is. By the time he pulls the curtain, he discovers a humanoid-like kaiju. It turns out that it's Kafka, who has taken on an insane transformation. Kafka tries to convince Ichikawa that it's really him. In turn, they both freak out, causing a huge commotion and frighten an elderly man who in turn decides to call the defense force. Ichikawa then urges they should escape before he is killed. Another flashback appears with young Mina and Kafka in a library, with Mina mocking Kafka of how he aspires to be a hero like in the manga, with Kafka begging her not to tell their mothers, who will end up telling the entire neighborhood. Mina then thanks him and starts to reassure him that she won't be afraid as long as they are together. It then goes back into current time, where Mina briefs the rest of the 3rd Division that a kaiju has been spotted at the hospital and that everyone is in danger. The city's kaiju alarms sound off, saying that there is a kaiju within Yokohama. It is widespread all over the news, and while some citizens are over it, some are cautious. They are then urged to stay indoors. Back at the hospital, the old man is terrified at the sight of Kafka's new kaiju form. Ichikawa suggests that Kafka should flash a smile for the old man, in which he fails miserably, and Gramps ends up fainting due to the sight of Kafka's new ugly face. Kafka tries to help Gramps out and makes things worse by destroying the hospital wall by barely touching it. The rest of the patients come out to see the ruckus. The two decide to make a run for it before the defense force arrives. Kafka attempts to open the window and destroys the wall. Ichikawa states they need to get out of there and jumps out the destroyed building. Kafka follows and makes a huge leap. Meanwhile, the defense force are headed towards Kafka and Ichikawa. As they are running away, Ichikawa asks Kafka if it is really him in his new body. Kafka then replies he isn't even sure anymore, as his body starts to act extremely weird, a little too weird. It gets even weirder when he tells Ichikawa that he needs to pee, and then starts to have a glorious accident. Kafka is embarrassed and pathetically falls to the ground, wondering who is going to take him as a bride, and doubts he has a chance in the defense force. Ichikawa tells him hell, no he wouldn't, and they would kill him on the spot. He falls into despair and believes he won't catch up to Mina ever again. Ichikawa spots a restricted area and says it would be the perfect place to hide, as Kafka senses something is coming. An ugly kaiju. Kafka's new powers now allow him to sense what type it is, the same one that attacked them before. Ichikawa states that it's perfect and that the defense force will split up, which they do. Maybe he's not so useless. In the area where the new kaiju has appeared, a little girl is trying to save her trapped mother. Her mother tells her to save herself. The little girl desperately tries to lift the rubble, but it's too late and the kaiju shows up. Just when the two are about to get wrecked, our not-so-useless Kafka shows up on time, giving it the one-punch man hit, and he's surprised at how much stronger he is. He tries to check on the little girl and tries to cheer her up, which in turn scares the little girl even more. The kaiju makes its way back for more, and Kafka starts powering up, stating he's going to punch it as hard as he can. Kafka counts to 3 and ultimately gives it the Saitama punch, making it rain kaiju blood. Covered in disgust, Kafka tells the little girl to get her mother to the hospital, which the little girl is frightened by the ugly sight of him. Kafka tries to reassure her that the defense force will be there soon and that he will go away once they do. The little girl approaches him and thanks him for helping them. It hits him right in the feels and has the same flashback of he and Mina. Ichikawa urges that they need to leave, as the defense force has been alerted. He is then able to reveal his face, saying he cannot give up and must be by Mina's side. As the defense force arrives, they are confused by what happened, so they ask the scared little girl. Mina reassures her to not be scared and promises that she will destroy all the kaiju, which in turn, the little girl asks Mina not to hurt the nice kaiju that saved her. Mina is shooketh by what she says. NANI? 3 months have now passed, and the news airs the story of the missing kaiju, who is really Kafka, if you haven't noticed by now, and is given the nickname Kaiju Number 8. Ichikawa thinks to himself that it's gotten out of hand, and that Kafka is the first kaiju to have successfully evade from the defense force. At work, Ichikawa is then informed that their results from the admission test have come in. Ichikawa finds out that they both have made it in, and has yet to deliver Kafka's results to him. His co-workers say that Kafka deserves it for all the hard work he's put in. When Ichikawa finds him, Kafka is caught in his kaiju form, eating his lunch on top of a dead kaiju. Gross. Ichikawa is pissed and starts beating the shit out of him for letting it slip out. Turns out, they played off the whole ordeal by telling the other patients they ran away when the kaiju showed up. Ichikawa then shows Kafka his results, to which Kafka brushes it off, proudly saying that he always washes out during the second round. Kafka explains he's been trying his hardest to learn to transform to his normal body willingly. Ichikawa precautions him to not transform in front of the officers, or else he will be killed on the spot, and then from then on, the two of them are rivals, and that he needs to get it together. The next day, they both arrive at the Tachigawa base, as the other applicants start rolling in. They are interrupted by an ugly blonde chick, calling Kafka an old man, saying his car is in her parking spot. She demands the spot 55, since it's her lucky number for the day. Kafka starts to freak out when it seems like she's about to develop plot armor and moves the car with one arm, shocking Kafka and Ichikawa with the power of her suit. She reveals herself as examinee 2016 Kikoru Shinomiya, stating her hobby is killing kaiju. Ichikawa recognizes her, but just then, she suddenly sniffs Kafka's stench, saying he reeks of kaiju. While Kikoru wonders why kaiju disposal workers are here, Kafka picks his truck back up. She's shocked that an old geezer can lift something so heavy without hurting his rusty old back, and thinks he must have a special suit like her. He doesn't confirm or deny this, but tells her to remember his name. Talk about overconfidence. As they talk, Kikoru's butler takes the parking spot, so Kafka still loses this brawl. Kikoru is now excited to compete against him in the exam. She leaves with her butler and security. After they're gone, Kafka finds Ichikawa staring angrily at him. Ichikawa warns him not to use his powers openly again. Kafka apologizes and explains that he only transformed parts hidden by his clothes, not the one you are thinking of. Some guards hurry Kafka and Ichikawa to get inside. Before they do, Ichikawa warns Kafka that he'll tell on him if he transforms again like that. Kafka agrees, and they go in. But during the exam, Kafka is struggling to keep his on his legs. He's used to daily training and hard work, but it's not helping here. Before the exam started, Kafka and Ichikawa learned it had a fitness test and a surprise aptitude test. They focused on acing the fitness part since they didn't know what the aptitude test would be. But Kafka's doing badly with his rusty old back. He used to be below average, but now, with his older body, he's at the bottom. He considers using his powers to do better, but decides it wouldn't be fair. When the results come, he regrets not cheating, especially when Kikoru brags about beating him. Kafka feels embarrassed by his earlier confidence. Kikoru enjoys his reaction. What a bitch she is. Even though Kafka's last in the rankings, Ichikawa is proud he didn't cheat. Kafka regrets it now though. Ichikawa tries to comfort him, saying the other candidates are exceptional this year. For example, Haruichi Izumo ranks second and is a top student from the Kaiju Neutralization University. Aoi Kaguragi turned down a big sports contract to join the Defense Force. Most applicants are from Kaiju Neutralization Universities, so they've trained for this. The standout is Kikoru, who graduated from California Neutralization University at just 16. Everyone's been trying to measure up to her. Hearing Kikoru's achievements being discussed, she comes over to rub it in Kafka's face again. He grabs her shoulders, admitting he didn't realize how talented she was, but then her bodyguards whip his ass for touching her. When Kikoru tells them to stop, she taunts Kafka, saying she'll keep outclassing him. Kafka vows to beat her, but he knows he's in trouble for the next part of the exam. Ichikawa tries to cheer him up, mentioning that the second part has been about kaiju disposal for the past 2 years. That's good news for Kafka since it's his field. The test also checks teamwork and raises awareness about the tough job of disposal workers, which is why Ichikawa chose it. He wants to work hard with Kafka. However, when they start the second part, Vice Captain Hoshino announces they'll be killing live kaiju. Kafka and Ichikawa are shocked, as this wasn't part of their plan. The kaiju charge at them, but there are safety measures in place. Metal bars block them, and soldiers are ready to kill them if needed. While others stay calm, Kafka panics and falls over, amusing Kikoru. Kafka asks Ichikawa why they're facing live kaiju when they thought they'd only dispose of kaiju bodies. Ichikawa explains that was only the format for the past 2 years. They decided to change it. Hoshino assures them they'll have the proper equipment, like the special suits Defense Force members wear. Ichikawa tries on his suit, which immediately adjusts to fit him perfectly. Once the measurements are done, it activates kaiju muscle fibers, making him feel much harder, stronger. These suits are made from kaiju material and boost combat power, making them ideal for fighting kaiju. Konomi measures the combat power of those wearing the suits. Ichikawa's at 8%, followed by Izumo at 18%. Other candidates range from 14 to 15%. The percentage shows how much of the suit's power the wearer can use effectively. Most people can only handle about 20%. Having so many candidates above 10% is impressive this year. When Kikoru puts on her suit, her combat power is an outstanding 46%, like a platoon leader. More like a bitch. Ichikawa feels a bit down with his 8%, but Hoshino assures him it's good for a first time. As long as you're not at 0, it's okay. Kafka, however, scores a perfect 0. Talk about bad luck, which Hoshino finds amusing, though he knows Kafka's likely to fail anyway. Kafka struggles with the suit, despite his efforts. Kikoru gets annoyed because she saw Kafka's skill when he lifted his car, wondering why he's struggling now. As everyone gets suited up, Hoshino announces the exam will start. The candidates head to the training area. They'll face one big kaiju and 32 smaller ones. These kaiju caused fatalities, and are now used for training. Candidates must kill them using anti-kaiju weapons, with their actions monitored by drones. If they're in danger, the suit's shields will activate, but they'll be disqualified. Hoshino can't guarantee everyone's survival, but if they sign a death waiver, they can begin. As the test begins, they all rush into the field, with Kikoru leading the way with her impressive speed. She quickly takes down the first kaiju, showing no signs of slowing down. Meanwhile, Kafka doesn't move at all. With his output at 0, the equipment is too heavy for him. Ichikawa is unsure what to do since they lack firepower. Then Hoshino mentions that Captain Mina is watching, motivating Kafka. He explains to Ichikawa that they're being tested on adaptability. Since they lack firepower, they should focus on support. They notice a fight to their right and head over to help. Kafka recognizes the body of the kaiju from one of the disposal jobs he had and knows how to defeat it. He throws a stun grenade, temporarily disabling its eyesight. He then tells Izumo to aim for its weak spot, the stomach. Izumo is unsure at first, but follows Kafka's advice and takes down the kaiju. Impressed, he thanks Kafka for the help. Kafka and Ichikawa move on to help others, using their knowledge of kaiju weaknesses. While planning their next move, Kafka is blindsided by a kaiju, injuring him badly. The control room sees this and prepares to deploy his shield, which would disqualify him. Kafka tries to get up, but might not make it in time. Hoshino had expected Kafka to drop out first, which is a shame since he likes Kafka's, and no, he's not gay. Before Kafka's shield can be deployed, Kikoru defeats the kaiju just in time. She mocks Kafka for being useless, but tells him he doesn't get to quit as long as she's around. Kafka almost feels grateful until she insults him again. The other candidates want to prove themselves, but Kikoru outshines them all. Kafka wants to continue, but his leg is broken. Hoshino contacts Kafka, warning him of severe injuries. Kafka must decide whether to give up. He knows he's not the most talented old guy around, but he refuses to quit. Hoshino suggests he drop out for his safety, but Kafka decides to keep going. Ichikawa checks on Kafka, who insists he's okay and manages to stand despite his broken leg. They agree Kafka can continue as long as it doesn't get harder for him. Kafka tells Ichikawa to go ahead, but Ichikawa refuses to leave him behind. Ichikawa carries Kafka on his shoulders, embarrassing them both, but allowing them to continue as a team. Ichikawa acts as the legs, while Kafka uses his knowledge to help them attack. While Kafka and Ichikawa struggle to catch up, she dominates the exam, stealing kills from others. She effortlessly dispatches the last small kaiju with a staff, and then takes down the giant one with a grenade distraction and a shot through its mouth. Despite their efforts, Kafka and Ichikawa achieve nothing, even with their unconventional teamwork. Kafka complains about Kikoru's speed before collapsing from exhaustion. As the surveillance drones are recalled and injured participants are sent to the hospital, Hoshino is amazed by Kikoru's skill in defeating the big kaiju alone. Mina praises Kikoru's power, and Hoshino admits she deserves it. He expected many to drop out, but Kikoru's dominance kept everyone going. She's likely to rise quickly in the defense force. Kikoru prepares to leave the battlefield, planning to rub her victory in Kafka's face. Suddenly, something from behind shoots her through the chest. Meanwhile, Kafka notices dead kaiju coming back to life, a horrifying sight. Ichikawa suggests they leave, but Kafka sees something he can't ignore. Kikoru is on the brink of death, but manages to focus her shield on a single point to prevent her heart from being pierced. Despite her injuries, she refuses to give up because there's still a kaiju to defeat. She's puzzled by the humanoid kaiju's presence and its ability to talk, but it lets the giant kaiju handle her while it revives the monster. Kikoru is shocked by the intelligent kaiju, but knows she must take it down. However, before she can, the kaiju disables all her limbs with its shots. In the control room, Hoshino learns of Kikoru's injuries, but lacks visual confirmation since the drones were recalled. Strangely, life signals are detected from the defeated kaiju, now more powerful with a resilience score of 6.4. Only Hoshino or Mina can handle this, so they rush to save the trainees. Meanwhile, an evacuation order is issued, but Kikoru refuses to leave with the revived big kaiju threatening lives. She uses her suit to stop her bleeding and stands to fight, recalling her father's demand to be a perfect soldier. However, she's quickly knocked aside and sent into a memory of her youth, where her achievements and her attitude went unnoticed by her father. Despite her injuries, Kikoru is driven by her father's demanding expectations never to give up. She keeps firing her gun, hearing his voice pushing her to perfection. Knocked down again, she fights on with her remaining functional arm. But as the kaiju regenerates its horns, Kikoru screams in pain. With Mina and Hoshino too far away to help, she prepares for the end as the kaiju charges an energy blast. Just as she accepts her fate, Kafka appears. blocking the blast and transforming into his kaiju form to take over. Meanwhile, evacuation efforts continue as skilled fighters fend off the kaiju. Ichikawa worries about Kafka and suggests evacuating, but they're told Kikoru is holding off the revived kaiju alone. Kafka hears this and heads there, despite Ichikawa's protests. Ichikawa hopes Kafka won't transform in the middle of the base, but he knows Kafka will do whatever it takes to help Kikoru. Kikoru is baffled seeing Kafka transform into a kaiju. Kafka desperately pleads with her not to report him to the defense force while deflecting another blast from the giant kaiju. He assures her he'll explain later and advises her to rest while he deals with the kaiju. The control room detects Kafka's kaiju energy, suspecting another kaiju's arrival, but camera malfunctions prevent visuals. They register a fortitude score of 9.8, which is crazy. Kafka knows reinforcements are coming, so he aims to end it quickly. He delivers a devastating punch, tearing the kaiju apart. Turning to Kikoru, he protects her from a sneaking kaiju. He reassures her safety but scolds her for risking herself. Ichikawa arrives, admonishing Kafka for his recklessness. Kafka is surprised that Ichikawa is there, but Ichikawa was concerned about Kafka's actions. Meanwhile, Kikoru faints, collapsing to the ground. Hoshino and Mina arrive at the scene, puzzled by the chaos and missing candidates. The control room reports Kafka, Ichikawa, and Kikoru heading to Gate 6, accounting for all examinees. While Hoshino acknowledges Kikoru's strength, he doubts she could achieve this alone. Many questions remain unanswered, prompting Mina to suggest involving the investigation and disposal team. Meanwhile, Kafka and Ichikawa are recovering, with Kafka hospitalized for minor injuries. Kikoru receives advanced treatment for her wounds. Kafka is miffed by the differing treatment, but acknowledges Kikoru's greater need. Mina thanks them for rescuing Kikoru, but Kafka defers conversation until he officially becomes an officer. In her recovery pod, Kikoru is visited by Hoshino, who thanks her for defeating the kaiju. Conflicted, she remembers Kafka's aid, but decides to protect him by claiming responsibility for the kill. The Slenderman kaiju listens in on the news report about the Defense Force incident, sitting on a toilet seat, expecting to hear about the chaos he caused. However, he's stunned to learn there were 0 casualties. Puzzled, he wonders who could have thwarted his plans. Suddenly, his phone rings, revealing he can transform into a human. He answers to a member of the disposal squad, scolding him for his extended break. The kaiju exits the restroom to find the squad waiting, unaware of his true identity. Watch this next video.